enough of that. We know what you're here for. You're here because you want to know a little bit about interviewing. Those great tips that you can use, not just for finding a job, but for anything. Today, Francine Juhlin is leading a conversation about effective interviewing. She and her guests will talk about why interviewing skills are so important in all walks of life and how we can improve our skills when the interview really matters. For timing purposes, Francine will be asking for the green at 20 minutes, the yellow at 21 minutes, and the red at 22 minutes. This will be an interactive session. So although her and her panelists will be discussing different items, you will be encouraged to answer and participate. People, please put your hands together for our very own Francine Juhlin with her panel discussion entitled Effective Interviewing Tips.
Okay, raise your hand if you've ever been on a first date. Okay, we've all been on a first date. And what is that? But essentially, an interview. You're interviewing this person to see if you're a good match. This happens in the business world where, like Akeem said, you're in a job interview trying to get a job. As an author, speaker, and coach, the interviews take a different turn. We're on podcasts, or I go to vendor events. So I'm being interviewed directly by my consumers. They want to know, is my book right for their kid? So there's a so mark it down, O'Connor. What I want to do today with the help of my two guests is talk about how we can improve our skills for the next time we go on a first date. Most of us probably won't, because I know pretty much everyone here is married. Or if we have to go get a job. God, I hope I never have to do that again. Or if you find yourself on a podcast or some other situation where you are being interviewed. And I'm also an interviewer. So learning some tips on how to interview helps me become a better interviewer. And that's how I met our first guest, Liz. We met in a networking event, and I loved her topic so much that I asked her to be on my podcast. And I interviewed her about what she does. So first, Liz, I'm going to ask you to tell everyone what you do so we know what area of interviewing is your superpower.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Francine. So, I am a career and life coach for teenagers and young adults, and I help them and their families launch out of the house so they don't live at home until they're 40 years old and they get off the payroll. I have married my 20 plus years in corporate recruiting as someone who has hired and interviewed thousands of people for every type of job from early career all the way up to leadership for many companies that many people have heard of, which is Spotify, SiriusXM, Disney, NBC, Glassdoor, eHarmony, Lucky Brand, and the list goes on.
Thank you, Liz. And then Christine was introduced to me by our very own Karen Vanderlyn. And she has an amazing background coaching executives. So, can you tell us a little bit about your superpower in the field of interviewing?
Well, I was actually the operator as well. So I sat on the CEO side. So I was kind of like the last call on a bunch of interviewing, people and bringing people into the organization. But now the way I coach executives, especially around the interviewing process, is to remember that it's a two-way street. As much as you're interviewing the interviewee coming in is also an opportunity for them to ask the questions about the company, the culture, growth potential. I think that's something that's really, really important this day and age with, the younger generations coming into the workforce. And I'm sure Liz can weigh in on this as well. Just knowing that, like, the decade that we grew up in coming into businesses, we were just taking the job. Like whatever, we didn't take that time to ask questions. And I think it allowed us not to make very informed decisions, where I think the young generation that's coming up now is really asking those hard questions. They want to know what their growth path is. They want to know what kind of opportunities. They're also, a bit more courageous than I would say I was when I was in my 20s, and willing to go and ask those hard questions, like what's the most challenging aspect of this job? What's one thing about working here that surprised you in a difficult way? And I think that those are really important questions that I think older leaders and interviewers need to kind of be prepared for to answer. And so I really kind of coach and train on both sides.
I love that. And what I heard is that active listening is a huge skill to learn when you're being interviewed or whether you're the interviewer. And I'm going to pose this question to Liz because, as a podcast guest, we didn't have a set of questions all aligned because we just started having a conversation, and I facilitated that conversation to ask questions based on what I heard her say. So, Liz, what I want to know is, when you are coaching a young adult for whether they're doing a college interview or maybe their first job, how do you explain to them that they need to listen maybe even more than they speak?
Yes, that is a great question, and that is not an easy thing to do, whether you're a teen, young adult, or even an adult. Active listening and hearing, especially in an interview, is not easy because, truth be told, most people, at least most people I've come across in my 20 plus years, interviewing is gives them anxiety. And so when you're anxious about something, you're not going to be someone that is focusing on listening because you're anxious and you just want to get whatever you're saying out. And also, and this is something that I really stress with my clients, is it's normal to be a little nervous in an interview, whether you're new in the workforce or you've been in the workforce for 100 years. It is very normal. However, I said that word, but what I will see. So what I will say though is I always have people take deep breath, and I have found that when you take at least 2 to 3 deep breaths, you're more that calms the nervous energy one might have, and they are a little bit more apt to listen because they're not as nervous. Their heart isn't racing as much. And then when the interviewer asks questions, I always tell my clients, really listen. And if you don't catch every word, that's okay. Can you, I always have them say, I'm so sorry. I didn't catch that last part. Can you repeat? And when that happens, they, in my experience, they're a lot more not as anxious, and they're a lot more able to really listen to the whole sentence of an interview because so many people are doing this type of interviewing, which is star or car or it. I was trained in behavioral interviewing, so it can go, so things can go on. For example, it's like, tell me about a time when you were in school and you helped with a project and the project went sideways, and how did you handle it? What were some learning, some takeaways? I mean, that's a lot. So I always tell people, again, take a couple of deep breaths, don't rush your answer, and ask for the person to repeat.
Well, that goes back to what Steph said: confirm.
Yes.
So we're going to use storytelling as a method when we answer our questions. And confirm that we understood the question before we move forward.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's so important.
Now, Christine, how does listening play in communication? Maybe we're not in an interview per se, but you're just a regular conversation.
Sure. I mean, listening is really not part of communication. I really feel that it's the entire foundation because there's three levels of listening, right? Like most of us just we're human, like wired to listen to respond instead of listening to really understand. And I think, also then the third level is like listening to discover, right? And we're formulating, like while we're listening, we're on that level one listening, we're formulating our reply without even like really immersing ourselves into being present and then listening to understand like we slow down, we pay attention to the words, the body language. What does this person actually mean rather than what will I say next? And this isn't just for interviewing, it's in for relationships, marriages, from work stuff, work related activities, everything. And I think the underlying piece that's always missing, and what I try to tell everyone that I coach or work with is approach listening like with curiosity and just really, like as Liz said too, taking that pause. But listening is, I'm Jim can probably chime in here about Maxwell's communication. Like we all are just humanly wired to listen to respond instead of really. And I think one of the things that is shows the most respect for someone is when you can actually be present and listen and take that pause and be focused without the phone or whatever, but also just listening to understand and listening to discover. And that's where I think a lot of people, if we approach conversations with the idea of curiosity, I think it would really change a lot of relationships, both personally and professionally.
Yes. Today, before this meeting, I went and did an active listening exercise with a bunch of realtors. And we started, one man got up and told us about a horror situation he had during a sales process. Then someone else had to get up and not say anything to him, but ask questions. And then the rest of the audience continued with what they heard and asking more questions. And by the end, we established that the buyer just wasn't ready to buy. He didn't do anything wrong. Whereas if they just took what he said for 2 to 3 minutes about the situation, they might have jumped all over him, telling him everything he did wrong. But because we opened up that conversation and listened to each other, we were able to decipher that there were other things going on behind the scenes and under the surface. And in a job interview, isn't that important to make sure you understand the question fully and then tell your story to be understood? So many times they tell the interviewer what they think they want to hear rather than what really happened. And I'm going to pose this question to Christine. Can an interviewer tell when someone's faking it?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, usually the person who's interviewing, hopefully they have, some training in communication. I love Maxwell Disc because it's like understanding others and their communication styles to understand like whether they're really showing up with authenticity or they're just rehearsing to get the job. But that's why it's always important in the interview to ask some personal questions, like, understanding them a little bit more. I think a lot of people fake it till they make it. And I think it's really, Liz would probably be able to really weigh in on this because of how many years and how many people she's interviewed. Um, but I think you can tell, but sometimes maybe not right from the first interview. It may take some time. People, I'll come in with facades and ideas of like what they want to be versus, how they think they should show up. And it puts a little bit more pressure on the interviewer to really kind of sift through what's real and maybe what's inflated or maybe what's not really accurate.
Liz, do you want to chime in on that question?
Yes. So I do think I have I don't know if it's a superpower or not, but I really can tell when someone is faking the interview. And I can tell within 1 minute. Maybe it's because of my, decades worth of, experience, but I'm also someone who's very intuitive and I have always been very observant and I will ask tricky questions. I will ask again, I will ask a question three different ways because that will tell me if it's true what they're saying. So I will start with one question and then go on to some other questions and then come back to it, but phrase it in a different way. And if the answer is similar, then I know it's true. And if it's not, then obviously I know that it's not true. I've had so many people fake an interview and it's kind of shocking. But it's body language, it's how they say it. It's another telltale sign is looking me in the eye or looking away or up, even if it's on Zoom or in person. So a lot of it is really body language.
So, what I just heard is keeping your composure and having poise in the situation can make sure that the interviewer sees you as a credible source. And even if you are telling the truth, looking away like this, if you're nervous, could give them the opinion that you're not being authentic when in fact you are.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, please.
So another telltale sign for me is when a candidate or anyone else I'm interviewing dances around the question. That is, and it's it can be easy. I mean, it can be easy to see when someone is dancing around, but I do want to say, and this is just my personal opinion, that I do think interviewing is a skill. I mean, and that's on someone who's interviewing someone. I think that is a big skill, and it's not easy. I have trained new hiring managers and leaders on how to interview and asking the appropriate questions. Christine, is it Christine? Oh,
Yes.
yes. Okay. She mentioned asking personal questions, and yes, but there's a fine line. You got to be careful about the personal questions. But I always start with an icebreaker.
Love it. And now I want to ask Christine, what communication mistakes hold professionals back the most? And the reason I want to ask this question is because, and I use the word professionals because it could be a professional author, it could be a professional coach who's doing the podcast circuit to promote their coaching. It could be a professional CEO, or even I was an aircraft electrician. And when I went to job interviews in the government, they gave us a list of 5 questions, gave us 30 minutes, and said, here. And there was no back and forth, no communication. It was simply, reciting your answer to all 5 questions in a time limit. So there are different types of interviews. So I use the term professional what kind of communication mistakes do professionals make?
Um, I just said, I opened with, oh my goodness. So, one, again, the first mistake I would say is people tend to take things personally that were not meant to be personal. And I think a lot of most professional miscommunication is not personal. It really isn't. A colleague's curt email is usually something about their workload, not about you. The boss's, pointed feedback is usually about the pressure that they're feeling. Um, the client's frustration is usually about, not being able to, hear it correctly or something. And the tendency is that people just get defensive and they escalate small things into very large things. And then that just really starts to erode the relationship on the professional side. And the skill really is to learning what is this person actually saying before asking how I feel about it. How do I feel about it? It's more putting things into context. One of the other mistakes that I find is that people are listening to defend instead of listening to understand, right? And that kind of goes back to what we talked about with, the three levels of listening. And it's not that people are closed-minded in nature. I just feel that they're under certain pressures, they shift into defensive listening. And the professionals who really break free of this are really able to be present, kind of get to that second and third level of listening. Another mistake that I've, find a lot oftentimes in professional is assuming that we've been clear with, assuming that the other person knows exactly what we mean. And, thinking about it, like if you ask, like, what am I asking for? Here's why I'm asking for it. And here's what I'm trying to accomplish. And this is what success looks like. I think within most companies, if we are clear within those meetings or within those emails, everyone is aligned on the same page. And for the person who's receiving that communication, if they're not clear, to have the courage to ask for those 3 or 4 questions to be answered. And I think that would really promote a lot fewer meetings, more engagement. I mean, communication is really usually a bottleneck in every organization. It really is. And I think it's simple to resolve, but it's not so simple to put into practice because you got to get everyone on the same page.
Thank you so much, Christine and Liz. Now I'd like to open it up to everybody else. How can Toastmasters help alleviate some of the issues and problems that we've talked about today? Krista.
Masters is a great way to learn all sorts of skills because you never know what people are going to be speaking about. Oftentimes, they speak about their professional and personal lives. It's a little bit random in that way, but it's also strategic that you can decide to attend certain events that you have an interest in. I know I've done that. Another way that Toastmasters can be useful is by helping us develop some good habits. As an example, I'll preview the counter report a little bit and say that we have some people who have a lot of ums and ahs and all sorts of filler words. But rather than focusing on the individual words, if there isn't a particular pattern, like a particular word that you can stop saying, for me anyway, I notice that the more nervous I am, the more anxious or otherwise emotional I feel, the more my filler words come out. So as a result, I like to pause. That's a habit that I am cultivating. Although too many pauses aren't necessarily a brilliant thing either, I feel like it's the best step, the best bridge between loads and loads of filler words and or a specific filler word. In my case, it was that was recurring over and over, and that poise that we always look for.
Thank you, Krista. That was well said. And now, Steph.
I will keep this short. Toastmasters gives us the opportunity to practice being both present and to take a breath when we are in different situations. Obviously, one of the reasons that I'm coming back to Toastmasters is because I know that I need more practice. So I hope we all continue to practice together, support one another, and cheer each other on. Back to you, Francine.
Thank you, Steph. And now I'd just like to thank our guests very much. And we hope you join us. We hope you find value in what we do here as Toastmasters. And I'm going to pass it back over to Aki.